Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we are here for UFC Fight Night Las Vegas at the inaugural The Theater at Virgin Hotels. Missing our third musketeer today, but my man Dan, how we doing today, sir?
Man, we're still coming off the high of what was a spectacular UFC 285. I mean, what can I say, right? From a King's Purse perspective, we swept the card, no doubt. I think on a personal level, it was one of my best cards. I think since we started, tracking this thing, and yeah, just wild night of fights, right? I mean, you got Valentina Shevchenko getting dethroned. You got John Jones just coming in there, making it look easy. Shavkat with a crazy, crazy third round finish of Jeff Neal. I mean, just a wild night of fights. Not too many surprises, to be honest, outside of I think Grasso. But yeah, no, it was great fight, great night all around.
Yeah, truly miraculous and legendary night. And it's one of those nights where we look back in 10 to 20 years, and I really just don't think we'll ever forget it. Kind of similar to, when GSP submitted Michael Bisping to win the middleweight belt. But man, just watching John Jones Gracie Octagon is truly something special. I mean, clearly he's already been the GOAT coming into that fight, just to solidify himself and take himself to a completely different level. Being the heavyweight champion of the world, it's such a pleasure to watch and to experience. And, I'll certainly be telling my grandkids. I know hopefully you'll be telling your grandkids about, the legend of John Jones and what a spectacular night of fights, man. Even, and then, like you said, to touch on, Alexa Grasso, I mean, cap off to her, cashing in as a massive, massive underdog that you called on the show, man. I mean, hats off to you. That was an incredible, bold move that, certainly myself and our third musketeer we're not on, and the way that she was able to just snatch up that choke was miraculous. And then just to lastly touch on the Shavkat Rakhmonov, this is one of those dark horses of that division who, God, is such a bright future, man. I mean, can truly be a champion one day. And, he just goes in there with this mindset of wanting to eat your soul. And he really showed that on this past Saturday night, the way he was able to snatch up that rear naked standing. It was just vicious, absolutely vicious. But without further ado, let's hop into this, this decent card ahead of us. Certainly a fire, main event. But to kick off the card, we've got Anton Turkalj taking on Vitor Petrino. Dan, I'll let you kick this one off here.
Yeah, I mean, both these guys, for those that follow Dana White Contender Series, I mean, they were both on the last season. I think Turkalj is actually the only one who's fought in the UFC since then. He got submitted by Jailton Almeida, which seems like everyone's doing, these days. So Almeida is certainly a high heavyweight prospect that I think a lot of people are watching out for. This fight, I believe, is happening at light heavyweight, 205. And, Petrino really impressed me in this Contender Series fight. He was fighting a guy that he had beaten before. So, it's always a little trickier the second time around after you've actually fought a guy, beat a guy, and in that fight, credit to his opponent. I mean, he was taking shots and firing back. You could tell the guy didn't want to lose to him twice. But Petrino, really excites me as a prospect here. I mean, the guy, just from a physical attribute standpoint, seems to have all the tools necessary. Has great power in his hands. And, he seems to have some good defensive grappling as well. There were a number of times where Bellato in that fight was trying to bring this to the mat, and credit to Petrino. I mean, he was able to weather any kind of storm, and he didn't really face too much adversity. There was one point of the fight where he kind of slipped or got dropped, whatever you would call it. I wouldn't say he was like in danger, but certainly, again, like I mentioned, the second time around, it's always tougher game planning for a guy. And I mean, the result is the same. He ended up, finishing him. So I think in this fight, you've got a guy in Petrino who certainly is going to be the heavier hitter, more comfortable on the feet, versus a guy like Turkalj who, I mean, if you look at his track record, right, he's got a number of finishes, both from submission and from from TKO standpoint. So the question that I really have for Turkalj is just kind of his record. You kind of look at the guys that he's beaten, and I don't want to say it's kind of padded, but certainly no one of that's really noteworthy. a guy like Pacino, he has beaten UFC caliber opponents. He did finish Antigulov, back in UAE Warriors in 2021. So I think, unfortunately for the Cavs, I really think his only path to victory here is going to be the submission, and I mean that's going to be a tough task because Petrino seems to be a very physically sound fighter. He seems to be defensively sound on the ground. Doesn't really extend himself too much. So I think outside of maybe catching his back, locking in a choke. I mean, I'm not really sure where I see Turkalj winning here. And I mean, looking at this fight, Bet Online. I mean, this is essentially a pick 'em. So give me the guy with a little bit more finishing upside, a little bit more aggressiveness to his game, in Petrino. Again, you never know. Sometimes these guys coming off the Contender Series, we could see a completely different Petrino that we did earlier this year. And the fact that this is Turkal's second time around in the UFC certainly motivated, coming off a loss, his first official loss. So I expect him to come in motivated, but I just think Petrino is going to be a little bit too physical for him here. And again, if this stays on the feet, it should be a matter of time before he kind of lands the right shot.
Yeah, I mean Anton is 8-1, Vitor 7-0, and I think there's a reason that this line is at -110 because the bookmakers don't really know where to find the edge in this fight. Both guys are at the end of the day quite inexperienced. Anton, for what it's worth, in 23, pro fights and amateur fights, he's never been knocked out. In that UFC Dana White Contender Series debut, did land 11 takedowns in that fight. I think he showed pretty decent grappling ability. Obviously taking that fight on short notice versus Jailton Almeida, where the UFC said, look, Anton, you're the sacrificial lamb here. Go in there and do what you got to do and get finished. But, a guy in Vitor, like you said, Dan, I mean, he's an incredibly physical guy. Out of his 7 wins, 6 are by knockout. He made his opponent in the Dana White Contender Series look like he did like a free fall backwards. It was truly vicious. But I mean, look, I do think that there are some holes in his grappling game. In that Dana White Contender Series debut on the Vitor side, there was a moment where he almost got caught in a triangle choke. There's a point where he was in a body lock. And a guy in Turkalj who, I think is going to really have to rely on closing that distance and to grapple in this spot. It wouldn't surprise me if he does find a little bit of success in the grappling department. But from a betting perspective, for me personally, just given that both guys are so incredibly inexperienced, look, I mean, either guy can come in here and look -350, -400 by all means. I just haven't seen enough in either guy to be quick to the window. If you're approaching the Vitor side, I would imagine you probably get better value by just taking it by knockout, where I think Turkalj is probably going to show a little bit more initiating in the grappling department. So, look, Anton, out of the 8 wins, he does have 5 wins in the first round. So certainly he brings it early. But again, this is on the amateur scene, like you said, Dan, not versus the most quality of competition. And just not much to be desired on yet. So, watching Vitor fight, I noticed he doesn't throw like a ton of kicks. He does like to work the body very well with his hands, and inflicts heavy damage, but not the most versatile striker, if you ask me. But I think at this point in his UFC career, he can certainly rely on his athleticism to, find the job here versus Anton. So
Yeah, and I think looking at some of the other lines on this fight, I mean, it looks like the over 1.5 is set at -160. So seems like Vegas is expecting this to go at the very least over the first 7.5 minutes. But I think you're right. If you look at Petrino, I would say his path to victory is going to be in the finish. I think Anton does have solid grappling skills. I mean, granted, what we saw in the Contender Series came against an opponent that was less than stellar, but nevertheless, I mean that is a path for him. I think just on your point on Petrino getting caught in that triangle choke, he actually defended that quite well. When he was when his opponent kind of passed the leg and started to try to lock it in, he did the right thing, and that's apply downward pressure, um, and ensured that he wasn't letting his shoulder get too caught up next to his neck. And to me, that's actually a sign of grappling awareness, which I think against a guy like this you have to have. So yeah, I don't know if I'll be betting the method. I do lean Petrino here. I think just Turkalj just hasn't really shown me that sort of finishing upside that you see with his record. Whereas Petrino, I mean, the guy just packs heavy leather, and like I said, just seems to be the more physical guy in there. And we saw how Turkalj had sort of issues with Almeida, so it seems like a big physical guy seems to be somewhat of his kryptonite. But we'll see. Two young guys, two young prospects. Wouldn't be surprised to see Petrino falter here. I mean, again, first time in the UFC, guy come off Contender Series. You never quite know what to expect, and I think the odds kind of reflect that.
Yeah. And worth mentioning the translation of the nickname. So Petrino, his nickname, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, but it's ICAO, Icao, which translates to icon. So, but look, man, I mean, Vitor, he has his style. He walks down his opponents and he just lays on destruction. So it'll be really interesting to see if, if Anton is able to land that grappling here. I think that if this is on the feet, I do put a massive advantage on the Vitor side, just given the amount of power that he has. So it should be a fun fight here. I think that there's a lot of very worthy prelim fights that could have been slotted on this main card, but it'll be really interesting to see these two young fighters go at it here. But without further ado, let's hop into this next one. We've got Said Nurmagomedov taking on Jonathan Martinez. Right now, the line is currently sitting Said Nurmagomedov at minus 245 on DraftKings. We did lock in a play for the King's Purse on Said early this week. I believe it is at minus 205 or minus 200, Dan?
We actually locked it up, if I'm not mistaken, at around minus 225. The line actually right now sits at around minus 255 on Bet Online. And so if you were in the Fight Night Discord, we popped a message when we locked in that play. So hopefully you're able to get some of that early line value. I fully expect this line to be closer to minus 300 by Fight Night, and I think you know it's a good fight. I think what we saw in his last fight against Kakramanov is, I mean, Nurmagomedov was essentially kind of losing that fight, right? I mean, Kakramanov is just one of these guys that keeps up such a high pace and was just nonstop action against Nurmagomedov, who again he fights a little bit different than some of his Dagestani cousins. Still certainly has the grappling upside, but he got taken down 5 times, in that fight, which didn't last very long, right? I mean, it was I think middle of the second round where he ends up getting caught, and Kakramanov essentially just made a technical error and kind of left his neck out there a little bit. But outside of that, I mean, I think a lot of people betting Nurmagomedov were kind of holding their breath there because he was losing that fight. I mean, the guy got taken down 5 times, something that the only other time that he had been taken down multiple times was a fight that he lost against Hani Barcelos. So I don't think that he'll find that type of issue with Jonathan Martinez. I mean, Martinez is essentially coming off the best performance of his career, right? A fight where he absolutely dismantled, an aging Cub Swanson. So, I mean, I think it's worth saying that, while he did look amazing, right, Swanson, I think, is not kind of what he used to be. But, you can't really take anything away from him. I mean, he absolutely battered his legs and then just kind of finished the job, right? And for a guy like Martinez, who's had a lot of decision wins in his career in the UFC, I think it was a nice little coming out party, and I believe it was a co-main event spot. So I mean, this fight, to be honest, could very well be a co-main or even headline like a fight night card. I mean, this is a great fight. The thing for me here is just that as I mentioned, Martinez doesn't really present that kind of grappling upside that I think you're going to need to beat a guy like Said. Um, and I think on the feet, whereas I think it's certainly Martinez's biggest, I guess, most likely path to victory. Certainly not an easy one, right? Nurmagomedov can absolutely crack. Very diverse striking attack, and again, he can always lean back on that grappling. Which, I mean, looking at Martinez, right? It's a guy that kind of had an up and down career, right? I mean, he's won a lot of fights. He's lost fights that he should have won. That knockout loss against Davy Grant kind of comes to mind, a fight that he was winning and then just kind of got flatlined. But this guy also had losses to like Andre Ewell, Andre Sukuman. So guys that, I mean, I don't even think they're in the UFC anymore. So having said that, he has demonstrated, certainly in his last, I would say, 5, 6 fights, good takedown defense. Earlier on in his career, he did have an issue with kind of getting taken down in multiple fights, but I just think that the margin of error is going to be so small for Martinez here. I really just don't, I'm not going to say I don't give him a chance because you're talking to a guy who bet on Alexa Grasso last week, right? So you always have a chance in the UFC. But yeah, give me Nurmagomedov here. I I'm not sure he'll be able to finish Martinez because Martinez is a fairly durable fighter. I mean, he's only been finished once in how many fights? Five, maybe like 10 fights, 10, 11 fights in the UFC. So the guy's durable. The guy can take a shot. Um, from a submission standpoint, I mean, he's never been submitted. So, I mean, if I were to kind of cap this fight and from a method perspective, I would probably lean Nurmagomedov by decision. And just looking at the odds here, it seems as though Vegas kind of aligns with me, right? They've got Nurmagomedov at around plus 170 to win by decision. And they've got him plus 450 to win by submission. So, I mean, I certainly think it's possible. Just because we've never seen someone lose by submission before doesn't mean it can't happen. I mean, Nurmagomedov is that good that he can absolutely hand you your first submission loss. So, um, yeah, as you mentioned, we definitely got Nurmagomedov locked in already from a money line perspective. I'm going to wait and see if I want to bet the method, but yeah, definitely like Nurmagomedov in this spot.
Dig it. Dig it. Yeah. I mean, look, to be clear, Jonathan Martinez is certainly no spring chicken. He has 8-3 in the UFC. Of those 8 wins, he has 3 by knockout. And the way that Martinez fights, it is very poised. It's very relaxed. I think that he has a very high IQ. He doesn't really put himself in too many dangerous situations. He's won 4 straight and 6 of his last 7. So, clearly Martinez, like he's no joke here, for Saeed. In that Victor Morales fight, on the Martinez side, showed a lot of really great signs, in that late 3rd round, landed a really late takedown there. But just like little signs that, you like to see in a certain fighter, just to play that devil's advocate here. But, look, Saeed Nurmagomedov is 6-1 in the UFC. I mean, he's an absolute stud. Like you said, he's not your typical, Nurmagomedov, if you will, right? I mean, he's predominantly more of a striker. He does have that submission arsenal in his game, but certainly isn't looking to lean on the wrestling, in his mixed martial arts acumen. And look, I mean, he's got really slick kicks. He's got the spinning power. He just is able to land at so many different angles. And he's that type of fighter that you really just can't blink. I mean, we saw that versus Saeed. I mean, really, like you said, that margin of error is so slim, and I think it's really going to take just a small little error on the Martinez side for Nurmagomedov to capitalize inside the distance here. And I kind of like where your head's at here, Dan. I do like this fight to go to a decision. I think Saeed is incredibly dangerous and can certainly, capitalize on finding that neck or maybe even finding a guillotine here. But, I just think Saeed is just a more well-rounded fighter in this spot. I think, he's just built for this moment a lot more. I just think that he's a real deal, man. Not to get too confused with the Nurmagomedov last name, but look, I mean, he's a star. I really think that he's, built to make a run in the UFC. So I don't think this is going to be a very easy test for him. I think this is really going to show us, what Saeed is really made of. But I'm expecting a pretty close fight here. I don't think that Saeed's just going to walk over Jonathan Martinez here, just because Martinez has shown to remain so relaxed in there and smart. So yeah, I love Saeed by decision here. I'm glad that we locked it in early. Certainly wouldn't be surprised if this line steams here, but ready to cash in on another one for sure.
Yeah, no doubt.
So kick off this next fight. We've got Ricardo Lucas Ramos taking on Austin Lingo. The line right now, the last I saw it, Ricardo Ramos is sitting at minus 365. The comeback on Lingo is at plus 300. And look, I mean, you've got your 4-7 May versus your, Team Alpha Male. Watching Austin Lingo's tape is really not much to be desired. I mean, he fights very flat-footed. He is 2-1 in the UFC. In those 3 fights, he's only attempted 3 takedowns. So I don't think that he's gonna, initiate that grappling in this spot here. But if there's one thing that I notice about Lingo is, he's incredibly tough and durable. He's not very smart. I was watching that fight versus Luis Saldana, and I mean, Saldana like cracks him. I mean, he cracks open Lingo within the first minute of the fight. Lingo is busted in one of his eyes, and he just doesn't really fight very intelligently. Like when Lingo gets hit, he like has this tendency to just like push forward and jump in the fire and get hit even more. And I think that this line is certainly warranted. A guy in Ricardo Ramos who, we've kind of seen grow up in the UFC, right? I mean, he made his UFC debut when he was 21 years old. He's now sitting at 27. Again, trains out of Team Alpha Male. So with Josh Emmett and all those guys. And, he does have 7 of those 16 wins by submission. So he is pretty crafty. He throws these, spinning wheel kicks. He's spinning back fists, all these different kinds of angles. And I just think that Ricardo is just incredibly more dangerous in this spot here. Again, I just don't look at a guy in Lingo who is really UFC caliber. I mean, I don't know where your head's at, Dan, but I'm watching this guy and he's just not a lot to be desired. For a guy with a nickname Lights Out, you would think that he brings the heat, but he really doesn't. And to touch on the nickname translation in the Portuguese, so Ricardo Ramos's nickname is Carcasina, and it's a translation for carcass. Thought it was interesting, but look, I just think Ricardo is just a way more dangerous fighter. I mean, if you're talking about a guy who's going to fight for your money, certainly the Ricardo side. Just don't really see an avenue for Lingo to get the job done here. At a line at minus 365, not really quick to go to the counter on the Ramos side. Probably just going to watch it for what it is. But curious to hear your thoughts if you're thinking on any bets in this spot here.
Yeah, I definitely, I think it's clear that Ricardo Ramos is the A side here. He's he's a guy that, as you mentioned, he's kind of grown up in the UFC. Kind of had an up and down career, but at least lately it seems like he's ready to kind of make a run. Um, one thing I noticed a lot about Ramos that he loves the spinning attacks. I mean, there's a guy who has multiple spinning KOs in the UFC, one of which is sadly against my Montreal native Ayman Zahabi, a fight that he was losing and ends up knocking Ayman out and handing him his first loss. And then again he kind of goes up and down, right? Loses to Said Nurmagomedov by TKO, loses to Leron Murphy by TKO. Both two very, very tough guys, takes a decision loss to Tugagov, a guy who I think got robbed a couple of weeks ago. If you remember, that was that opening fight on the card where he was minus 500, and one of the judges gave the other guy a 30-27. Don't even get me started about that one. But outside that, it seems like they're bringing him along. I think the jump to fight Nurmagomedov was probably a little bit premature. I mean, you think that came in 2019 when he was like 24, 23. So clearly the UFC thinks very highly of him. I think this is a nice fight to build him up a little bit more. And I fully expect him to handle business here. I mean, really, I guess the question that I'm kind of asking myself is how he does it. Lingo, as I guess, again, his nickname Lights Out doesn't really fit kind of his, what we've seen so far in the UFC. But for what it's worth, I mean, this is a guy that does have a lot of finishes on his record, has never been finished. And so, again, you look at some of the odds for this fight, and I mean, it's interesting because the under 2.5 is sitting at minus 140. So, I mean, Vegas is telling you that this is not going the distance. And I think you're right. I mean, I actually think Ramos can have some form of spectacular finish here. And, his KO line is at plus 600. Submission line is plus 220. Inside the distance is looking at around plus 125. So it looks as though, the market is telling us that Ricardo Ramos is going to be finishing this fight. And typically, when you see fights of these odds, sort of minus 300 plus, typically that's where you do see the finishes. Being that regardless, the Lingo has never really been finished. I mean, I think looking at who he's fought, this is hands down his stiffest competition. And so, yeah, I definitely like Ramos here. I like Ramos to finish. I think he can get the submission. I think he can get the finish on the feet. I mean, he's very well rounded, so I wouldn't want to pick a specific method here, but I do think he has what it takes to win this one in pretty impressive fashion. And as I mentioned, I mean, the last time we saw him was about 8 months ago. So I expect a little bit more of an active year from him. I think he needed to. He needs a couple of wins under his belt before they kind of feed him to the wolves again. But rest assured, Ricardo Ramos is a great talent in the featherweight division. So I look for him to win with style points this Saturday.
Yeah, I dig it. And look, worth noting, Austin Lingo is coming in here on a 19-month layoff here. So, we could see one of two things. Maybe he comes in here and shows us some form of wrestling or some way to, be in a dominant position. But again, it's one of those things, even if Lingo does wrestle, I mean, you're talking about a guy in Ramos who is a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, right? So, even from bottom, he can certainly find a submission. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah, like you said, man, you hit it on the head. I just think Ricardo Ramos is just a well more rounded fighter in this spot here. Just again, not too much to be desired on the Lingo side, and could be a coming out party for Ramos here, where we've seen just shown some super flashy finishes in the UFC. He can certainly choke you out or finish you with his foot. So, going to be a fantastic, hopeful domination on the Ramos side. Maybe inside the distance might be a KP play here, but should be a good one for show.
Yeah, no doubt.
So this next fight, I believe we've already broken down. Well, I haven't broken down, but you guys have. And that is Nikita Krylov taking on Ryan Superman Spann. Man, I mean, I think I know where you sit, right? You're on the Ryan Spann side, if I can remember from your breakdown. So look, to just tie in here, Nikita Krylov, 10-7 in the UFC, truly a veteran, right? I mean, he's been in the UFC for just about 10 years now, and there's one thing about Krylov. I mean, he's super tenacious. I don't think that he has necessarily the highest of IQ, but if there's one thing about Krylov, he's going to walk you down and push you forward and look for a finish. If there's one, humongous red flag that I see on the Krylov side is, he does have 4 losses by submission in the UFC. And the way that Krylov can get a little bit sloppy with his takedowns, even with his striking, isn't to be desired. And a guy in Spann who, man, it feels like Spann has been in the UFC for way longer, but it's crazy to think that he is a Dana White Contender Series alum after getting knocked out by Carl Roberson, of course, ended up submitting Emiliano Sordi, who ended up landing in the PFL there. But look, I mean, Spann at 7-2 in the UFC, obviously coming off the big knockout versus Reyes, a lot of momentum here. Everyone's saying that it's this Ryan Spann 2.0, and I could see it, man. I mean, he certainly has the tools. He certainly has the proper training camp to, continue to evolve his game. And, he is going to have 2 inches of height, 2 inches in reach in this spot, particularly. But look, man, I just, man, the thing that I really do like about Krylov that I will mention is when he is on the feet, I mean, he's very accurate with his striking, he's landing at 55%, certainly dangerous by all means. And so is Spann. I just think that this fight brings a lot of volatility to the table. I think both guys can find a finish in the first round. I mean, look at that. Is that right? 22 first round finishes. I mean, that's just nuts. So yeah, no, I mean, look, this is going to be a super volatile fight. I know where you stand, Dan, but if you wanted to, piece off, add a little bit more to the Ryan Spann side, feel free.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not one to flip flop, especially when I already dive into a fight and I kind of plant my flag. And so this fight was obviously supposed to happen a couple of weeks ago. The day of the fight, we find out that Krylov has some sort of issue with his rehydration or whatever. At least that's what they tell us. No one really knows. For all it's worth, I mean, maybe there was just a lot of money coming in on Spann, and the UFC didn't want to have that fight. I mean, who knows what happens with these things? We saw a similar situation with Sergey Spivak and Derek Lewis, right? Where the day of the fight, Lewis had some sort of stomach issue, rebooked the fight, and he gets mauled in under a couple of minutes by Spivak, right? I mean, a complete absolute shit show. And people were giving Derek Lewis, a chance with that. I mean, you always got to give him respect. Give him respect. I mean, he is the knockout king in the heavyweight division, if you will. But yeah, a fight like this is actually kind of interesting, right? Because both guys are coming off pretty impressive victories. I mean, Krylov's win against Volkan Ozdemir, it was pretty sound. I mean, I would say. He didn't sort of blow him out of the water. It still went all 3, but at the end of the day, I mean, Uzdemir is a seasoned vet. He did take him down 7 times, which I mean, a guy like Uzdemir, obviously a striker, but I think doing that to anybody in the heavyweight division at that level is impressive. absolutely walked through Alexander Gustafsson. Um, so, he's clearly on a nice little streak now. But yeah, as you mentioned, it seems like this guy's kryptonite is the submissions. And it also seems like when he loses by submission, it actually happens as a result of a tactical error on his side. He's either overextending in a position, putting his head where it shouldn't. I mean, against Paul Craig, he was dominating that entire round, and then, in the last minute, he, goes for a heavy ground and pound from the top and ends up in a triangle choke. I mean, that is like the number one thing you don't do with a guy like Paul Craig who's looking for that type of fight. So that tells me that when you in the heat of the moment, Krylov does have a tendency to kind of throw caution to the wind, and I mean maybe show a lack of awareness. And a guy like Ryan Spann, I mean, seems to have a lot of, I mean, for one, lots and lots of guillotine victories, which sometimes is an opportunistic thing, but sometimes if you're looking for it, I mean, there are guys out there, specifically guys from like Team Alpha Male, that have made a career on having a strong guillotine choke. Spann is clearly one of these guys that has a knack for finding that choke, and I can absolutely see a situation where, you know, these guys are throwing leather, and maybe one guy shoots for a takedown. Maybe it's Krylov. I mean, again, he had so much success in his last fight with the takedowns. Maybe he goes back to the well and maybe he sticks his neck out for Spann to snatch. I mean, the thing about Ryan Spann is that if you look in his track record, I mean, even before he made it to the UFC, this guy was fighting like very high level grapplers, like Robert Drysdale, who a fight that he lost, but you get valuable experience points. And I think even though Krylov seems to have the edge from an experience standpoint, I mean, Span isn't that far behind. You talk about a guy with, I mean, how many fights does he have at this point? He's 21-7, so it's like they're not that far off. And I just think there's this narrative that um, you know, both these guys are obvious, lots of finishes on the record. So I don't even want to look at what the fight doesn't go the distance is at. I mean, unless I know the first time around it was something at like -4 or 500. Let me take a quick peek here. I mean, fight doesn't go. Yeah, it's sitting at -450, which sounds about right. Um, the other thing too is like the odds here fairly similar than what they were when they closed, right? So you've got, I mean, right now, looking at Bet Online, I'm seeing Span at +147, Krylov -167. I mean, I see this more as a coin flip. I just don't see how Nikita Krylov can be this high a favorite against a guy like Span, who's, came off a great victory. I mean, he looked probably better than he ever has in his last fight, and he's still an underdog. So I'm going to take a shot at Span here for sure. I mean, I just think he has all the tools. Um, what does worry me is if we see another version of Ryan Span like we did against Anthony Smith. But if what he's saying is true, I mean, it seems like he's taking this fight game a little bit more seriously than he ever has. I think sitting at number 8 right now, he seems to be primed for a top 5 opponent if he can get past Krylov. And again, a guy like Krylov who seems to kind of come up short in the important fights. I mean, he's had nice runs, but it seems as though he gets to a point where he finds an opponent that just kind of gets him. But he wins the fights that he should. I think this is again closer to a pick 'em, and for that reason, it's really dog or pass for me. And like I said, I was on Span beforehand. For me not to take him again here would make no sense. So yeah, give me Ryan Span, and I'll probably sprinkle Ryan Span to finish here because, as I mentioned, Krylov and both Span. I mean, they very much are killer be killed. I mean, we had a little run with Krylov of getting like a couple decisions, right? That fight with Glover went the distance. I think no one saw that coming. At the same time, against Ankalaev, against Johnny Walker. I mean, 3 fights that you would think for sure these aren't going the distance. But so maybe we see kind of that version. But I think Span is going to force a firefight here, and Krylov is going to do something stupid. So that's kind of my take here. So yeah, give me Span.
No, I dig it. I dig it. Worth mentioning on the Krylov side, In his 17 UFC fights, he's only been knocked out once, and it was in his UFC debut. Just thought that was really interesting here. Certainly we could see that world where Span knocks him down and finds a sub. I was looking at the sub line during your breakdown there, and Ryan Span by submission at plus 500 versus a guy in Krylov that has been submitted multiple times in the UFC. I don't think that's a terrible look. But yeah, no, should be an absolute banger here. You mentioned some weird juju here with this fight maybe going to a decision, but we'll see. But to kick off this next fight, we've got the battle of the Alexanders. Alexander Volkov taking on Alexander Romanov. I mean, what is there to say about Alexander Volkov? It seems like this man has been in this a staple of this division for the last 6, 7, 8 years. Has fought some absolute legends, right? Alistair Overeem, Curtis Blades, Derek Lewis, former champion Fabricio Verdum, who he ended up knocking out in the 4th round, and my man, Big Country Roy Nelson. Only some of the OGs may know, but look, man, this is a good fight. It's you have a guy in Volkov who is predominantly a striker, right? He's going to utilize that 6'7" frame, work behind that jab, that 5 inches in height, that 5 inches in reach, and just land volume. You're not going to really see Volkov, have a level change, right? He's going to want to keep this on the feet. He's going to land volume and inflict damage. Where a guy in Romanov, he's quite the opposite. I mean, his stand-up game isn't to be desired. It's not great. But if there's one thing about Romanov, he is landing well over 5 takedowns per 15, which in the heavyweight division is truly impressive. He is 5-1 in the UFC. He's got quite a few, submissions in the UFC, that being a key lock, arm triangle, forearm choke, which just so happened to be the first forearm choke in UFC history. And this is an interesting one, man, because, Romanov doesn't really have the cardio. I mean, we've seen him absolutely gas late. So it's one of those situations where, he's going to find that takedown early, I imagine. And if he's unable to find that knock, that submission or that ground and pound early, I think that he could really be in trouble. I mean, Volkov is incredibly experienced. He's been in those deep waters time and time again. But man, if there's something on Volkov's record that, I just can't get away from, it's the fact that Blades landed 14 takedowns versus him just a few years ago. Just not a great look. I mean, 14 takedowns is just absolutely massive. But the difference between Curtis Blades and Romanov, is Curtis Blades is going to be looking to take you down and ground and pound you out, where Romanov is strictly looking for that submission. I mean, that's just the name of his game. Very, very unique specimen for the heavyweight division. So obviously this line has been steaming. If I'm not mistaken, Romanov was minus 110 at one point. Looking at it now, minus 160 on DraftKings. So clearly money coming in on the Romanov side. But man, I'm not too quick to go to the Romanov side. Maybe it's some post-traumatic stress after taking him versus Marcin Tybura last time out. But should be a great fight. I mean, both these guys are, have the tools to get the job done. A Volkov late finish wouldn't surprise me, right? Where, you see a guy in Romanov who just absolutely gasses, or a first round submission on the Romanov side. So I'm still kind of in the middle here on this fight particularly, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this one.
Yeah, I mean, one of my one of my great calls earlier in late last year was Marcin Tybura beating Alexander Romanov, a fight where, I mean, once again, my 2 co-hosts thought I was crazy. Actually, 3 co-hosts. I think that's the episode we had Michael Carter Williams on, actually.
That's right.
But I saw kind of the writing on the wall, because Romanov showed that he's maybe not as dominant a grappler as we all think. I mean, in his fight against Juan Espino, I mean, he barely won that fight. And I think, had it not been for a couple of mishaps, I think Espino probably would have taken that one. I mean, he took him down multiple times. And then again, if you look at sort of his track record, I mean, who has this guy really fought, right? He's submitting Chase Sherman, he's KOing Jared Vandera, and he's losing to the heavyweight journeyman Marcin Tybura, a guy that obviously Volkov had already beaten. But I think you mentioned the Curtis Blades fight with Volkov, and you're right. I mean, the guy got taken down 14 times, but I think we're talking about 2 very different styles of grappling. Curtis Blades is just going to spam double leg takedown you over and over and over again. He telegraphs it, and he's a big, strong guy. And I think Volkov, it seemed like, he's not certainly a small heavyweight, but I think at that point in his career, he was probably coming in, closer to like 240, 245. I don't remember exactly what he weighed in at, but he, I think after that fight, it was a bit of a wake up call in the sense that, I mean, we've seen in his last fight, like he looked massive. The guy clearly has put on substantial amount of muscle. Obviously, kind of filling out that massive frame of his, 6'7". I mean, the guy is absolutely huge. He's going to have a 5-inch height, 5-inch reach advantage here, and I think that's going to prove troublesome for Romanov because he is a Greco-Roman style grappler, and that is all above the waist. And I mentioned this time and time again. I mean, against taller guys, body lock takedowns are actually much harder to get. Romanov is not a double leg guy. He doesn't attack doubles or singles. He body locks you, tries to push you up against the fence. He'll try and lift you up and slam you. And I just think the height of Volkov is going to cause him a lot of problems here. He may have some early success, and I really think his only path to victory is landing an early takedown, and from there, like unleashing ferocious ground and pound on Volkov. It can certainly happen. I think that's probably why we see him as the favorite, because I think in the heavyweight division in the opening minutes, he'll probably be the one that's a little more dangerous. But yeah, I think Volkov is at a point where, again, he seems to have put on the muscle. He seems like he's addressing some of the things that were his pitfalls in previous fights. And I think that he'll be able to hold off Romanov with, strong teep kicks to the stomach, keeping his distance. And I think the longer this fight goes, the more it plays into Volkov's hands. I would not be surprised if we see Volkov finish Romanov here, like, sort of mid second, maybe early third round. Um, I mean, again, I think the only shot Romanov has here is in that first round, just pounding him out, because clearly he has an issue with his gas tank, and the fact that he's, I think, for one of the first times in his career, probably going to be like the smaller guy. It's probably going to cause him some problems. I think this line is way off. I'll be honest. I mean, I don't understand how Volkov is. I mean, it opened up as more or less a pick'em, but I mean, now we're seeing him at like plus 130. So I mean, I'm gonna wait. And hopefully this line continues to steam, because I'm absolutely going to be taking some Alexander Volkov here. I mean, Romanov is a guy that I've loved to. I was waiting for the opportunity to fade him, and I got that opportunity with Tabora, and that fight played out exactly how I thought it'd be. I don't think Volkov has the kind of grappling that Tabora has, but he has what it takes to kind of fend off. I think Romanov's clearest path to victory here. So yeah, I like Volkov here, and at plus money, I mean, I think you should just wait. Hopefully the line continues to steam.
I dig it. And I was looking at the numbers here. So Volkov in round 2 plus 850, Volkov in round 3 plus 1400. I mean, I think that's a great look, right? I mean, we've seen time and time again the way that Romanov is able to fade. And, if there's one thing that you can kind of take away from getting taken down 14 times is the ability to get back up on your feet. And, a guy in Romanov who, may be able to land that takedown or two. But if Volkov is able to get to his feet, I mean, you got to imagine the amount of energy expenditure that he's inputting into those takedowns there. So, should be a very interesting one, man. It just seems like it's like a Romanov just absolute smash in first round, or Volkov, mid to late finish. So should be a pretty good one here. Volkov, Drago. I don't want to say he's, let's say, a legend, but he's certainly a quality journeyman in the UFC in the heavyweight division. Should be a great fight here. But without you have much else to add on this one, we can keep this puppy rolling to our main event of the evening. We've got Piotr Yan taking on Merab Dvalishvili. Now, we had the pleasure of meeting Merab in the streets of New York after UFC 281. And God, I had no idea this man was 5'4". I mean, he was just so small, but so big at heart. Like, you could feel his presence, like when you were around him, like, man, even though this guy's like a little spider monkey, you already know that he brings it. So, look, I mean, this is a fantastic fight between two guys that are truly incredible fighters, right? Piotr Jan, who many consider is one of the best, is the best 135er in this division. Of course, coming off back-to-back split decision losses. Man, don't even get us started with the Sean O'Malley play, because my goodness gracious, great balls of fire. If you don't think that the UFC is scripted, please rewatch that fight. Or my dog is singing to me right here. But look, I mean, Piotr Jan, I mean, we know what he brings to the table, right? From that Tiger Muay Thai, he's got those lightning fast strikes, lightning fast kicks, has that ability to grapple, which we've seen in some previous fights. And, okay, stop. Now, my boy Wiz Khalifa is going off right now. I'm going to mute myself, control him, and pass this off to you, Dan.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, I mean, I think interesting fight for sure. Certainly a little bit of bad blood from the Sarah Longo camp, right? I mean, Peter Yan loses twice to Aljo. Now he faces his teammate Valishvili. I mean, I think it's it's one of those fights where Yan just kind of needs a win here. He's been. I mean, listen. I'll be the first to say I thought he won. Well, I mean, naturally, I think he won. I mean, he did. That fight against Aljamain Sterling with that illegal knee was, you know, what can you say about that, right? Aljo, one might say he was kind of looking for a way out. I mean, did that illegal knee really affect him that much? Was he not? Was it not maybe the round and a half that he was just getting absolutely battered before a mental error by Peter Yan? So yes, I mean, Aljo won that fight, but he didn't win that fight. He was getting dismantled. The second time around, I thought Aljo was able to outpoint him. He was able to land the back, hold on. I wouldn't say he really threatened the finish at any point, but MMA is a game of inches, and one wrong move and you lose a position, and a guy can ride out a round and before you know it, you're down 2-3 rounds, and that's what happened. And he lost his shot to kind of recapture his belt there, and it seems like everything that can go wrong has gone wrong for Piotr Yan since then. I mean, that Sean O'Malley decision. Again, I'm not gonna complain about that. We were obviously on Yan. I was on Yan personally. We had some heavy exposure there, and at the end of that fight, I thought, great, we won, and then we didn't. So make of it what you will. I think at the end of the day, the I guess deciding factor in that O'Malley fight was the fact that O'Malley did land some strong shots on Yan, and I think that was enough to sway the judges. But I don't think that's something that Yan will have to worry about in this fight. I mean, what you get with Merab is a guy that is incredibly, incredibly tenacious. I mean, this guy just has zero quit in him. You talk about a guy who's going to fight for your money. I mean, this is a guy that will literally do anything to get in there. I mean, you're seeing videos of this guy online, jumping headfirst into an ice river, cracking his head. Um, it's pretty interesting. I mean, his only loss, well, he's lost a couple times, but that loss against Ricky Simone, I'll never forget that. Where at the end of the fight, he was, balls deep in a guillotine choke and just kind of trying to pump his legs to make sure that he doesn't kind of go out. He ends up going out and losing the fight, but just the awareness. Just this guy is willing to absolutely die in there, and that's the kind of guy that again you want your money on. Having said that, I mean, I think his ability to grapple, I wouldn't say he's the most technical grappler, but his tenacity is something that cannot be denied. And it also gives him a little bit of freedom on the feet because he's the kind of guy that can open up without the fear of having to be taken down or kind of get in a scrambling position or just end up in some sort of grappling scenario because he feels that any position on the ground, he'll be able to kind of scramble, get to his feet and kind of flip the script a little bit. I think having said that, there have been multiple times where we've seen Merab get clipped. Defensively, he is susceptible to a left hook, like we saw him get dropped against Marlon Moraes, a fight that he, you know, depending on which ref you land on, probably would have finished that, called that fight in the first round after he got dropped multiple times. But again, I think what that showed is that he can, defensively, like there are gaps in his game. And I think a guy like Yan, who is so sound offensively, so crisp on the feet, he seems to always get stronger as the fight goes. I think the fact that this fight is 5 rounds, it actually helps Yan a little bit because I do think that he won't have cardio issues. We know this. I think the fact that from a size perspective, these guys match up a little bit better than Aljo. Like Aljo was a really big 135er. So when he gets some of those advantageous positions, especially on the back, which is like his calling card, I mean, that's just a position that he's very comfortable with. Very, very tough. And the fact that he wasn't able to finish Yan from there shows me that Yan is no slouch on the ground too. So it's like I fully expect Marab to just be relentless as he always is. But I think Yan is just going to be a little bit too crisp here, and I do think that he'll be able to find Marab's chin at some point over the course of these 5 rounds and get him out of there. The over 4.5 is sitting at -220. And I just don't see it happening. I don't see a world where Merab Valishvili grapples Peter Yan for 5 rounds the way that Aljo did. I just don't because I think he's just a little bit too wild in there. I think Yan is kind of has his back up against the wall here. Like he needs a win. He needs this win. And Merab is coming in with all the momentum. And he's still a sizable underdog. So that just tells you that the odds makers still respect Jan's ability. I mean, this is a guy that couple things change in a couple of his fights, and he's the champion of this division. I mean, he just again got shit luck, unfortunately for him. But no, I like Peter Yan here. I'm unsure on how I'm going to play it. I do think a KO decision prop, like a double chance, would actually be a good look. And I don't actually have those odds up in front of me, but I could pull them up in a second. But I just, certainly from a submission standpoint, I think it's clear. I don't think he's submitting Marab, but yeah, no, double chance isn't up yet. But I do think that he has what it takes to put his lights out, and I think unlike Marlon Moraes, I think Yan is going to be able to stay composed, not empty the gas tank, and just kind of keep on Marab and just not kind of fall into that trap of letting him clinch him up and whatnot. Yeah, so he's like +210 to finish by knockout. Yeah, I mean, I think I would go contrarian here and bet Yan inside the distance. As good as Marab is, I just like I said, I just don't see a world where he grapples Yan to a decision. I just think Yan is too skilled here. So yeah, give me Yan by all means.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, you tapped on everything here, man. I mean, Peter Yan, I mean, he's had some incredible wins on his record, right? I mean, he sent Uriah Faber to retirement by knockout. He knocked out Jose Aldo. Obviously had a very tough fight versus Corey Sandhagen there. And, yeah, he's so due, but like I often wonder, during this breakdown, where is like the hunger factor in Peter Yan, like coming off the back-to-back L's where, you won at least one of them. How do you respond, man? Like, gosh, and the guy in Marab who, he's got that motor, he's averaging well over 6 takedowns per 15. And, the thing with Marab is, he's just not a pure finisher, right? I mean, out of his 15 wins, 11 are by decision. Now he does have a knockout on the regional scene versus Rafael Stotts, who's the UFC or the Bantam or is it Bellator champion, I believe, of the world. So
Right.
it was like a spinning back fist in like the first 15 seconds there. But I mean, you got to imagine like Aljo, who's training partners with Marab is giving him some tips and tricks and how to beat this man. And gosh, at this line, I just have a lot of trouble, going quick on the Yan side. Just given because we just don't really know how he's going to respond, to that absolute robbery versus Sean O'Malley there. And, Guy Marab, like you just can't slow down, and a guy who has continued to evolve his game. I mean, of course, he started off his UFC career losing 2 straight, like you mentioned, getting finished by Ricky Simone at the buzzer there. But, the guy is, 32 years old. He's, continuing to evolve and adapt and improve. And I imagine that he's got to be improving his striking, for sure in this spot. And, you know, I'm not on a side yet. I'm leaning on the Merab side, but, certainly Jan is so well credentialed, and he's, we know that he's one of the best 135ers in the world. There's no doubt about it. So, so many different types of narratives that can go down here, right? Like if Merab wins, he's on that track to fight, potentially his training partner in Aljo. If Piotr wins, maybe it's that slow track to get him the rematch versus Rashawn O'Malley. So it's really just hard for me to get it at that Piotr Jan line there. So my flag is still planted in the middle here, but I do lean the Merab side just ever so slightly, given the familiarity with Piotr. Given that his main training partner fought him twice, and should be a fun one. This is going to be a fantastic main event. I do like the contrarian belief of this going inside the distance. I think a lot of people think this is just going to be a super, super competitive 25 minutes here. But, both guys are just so fast and have so much great ability that, look, I mean, is it crazy to say that Merab can't find a finish here? Like, I don't know. And I think my motive to say this is just given where Piotr Jan's head is at. Because, if he takes an L here, like, the trajectory of his career really changes drastically. But if he comes in here and dominates, he's right back in the conversation. So going to be a fantastic, fantastic main event. Did you have anything else to add on this fire main card here we got?
No, I mean, maybe just the last comment on what you just mentioned. I mean, I just don't really see Merab's path to victory outside of a decision. Because, I mean, let's be real. I mean, if Aljo wasn't able to submit Yan, having his back for like 2 rounds of control time, um, I mean, submissions is not Merab's game. Like, his game is a grinding one to break you down and kind of, just break you. I mean, that's how he beat Marlon Moraes. It wasn't from one shot. It was just from just kind of that pressure. And I just think it's the kind of pressure that's not gonna break Yan. I just think Yan is too skilled. He has that will. He has the skills. And I just think it's. I don't think he's going to submit him. And I think, like I mentioned earlier, I mean, I think from his standing up, he has holes in his game. He throws wild, and a guy like Yan, who's so crisp and so clean on the feet, I really think he's going to land something and put Merab's lights out.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. Well, we'll be going through the picks during the prelims, dropping heat, dropping live picks, certain props, this, that, and the other. So definitely join in on the Knights of Degen Discord. We'll be chopping it up, making it rain. Dan, thank you so much for breaking it down. Certainly isn't the same with our guy, Mr. Matt Proto, but hopefully he'll be back for a pretty bold take next weekend, UFC London there.
And let's just shout out. Let's just shout out real quick. I mean, I know for those of you that use Bet Online, obviously one of our KP plays was boosted on Bet Online. We'll probably have something with them later this week. Still trying to figure out what the play was, but excited for everything that's coming with them. SoBet, we'll probably have a SoBet play up this week. We didn't have anything last week, just from a scheduling perspective. We didn't really have anything that we wanted to just put out there. We figured we just give everything to the Fight Night boys, and like and subscribe the show, guys. If you're watching the show, it's so easy to just hit that like button, subscribe it. I mean, it helps the algorithm, helps us, and it doesn't cost you a thing. These things are, these videos are free. We put out our plays for free. I certainly, from a personal perspective, and I think Kev as well, everything that I post is up on our Twitter. So support the cause and, keep the ball rolling and make you all some money.
Love it. Love it. Coming off of a clean sweep, coming off an 18-unit weekend last weekend. I mean, we're hot, and we're going to keep this puppy rolling, baby. Another opportunity to make it rain. Let's go. Let's cash in, boys.
Yes, sir.